6, my precious Albert came to me and stayed with me till 12 minutes past 7. We stood by the fire together, and Lazen came in for a few minutes and talked with us. Then he took me round the waist and looked down so dearly, so kindly on me, and clasped me in his arms and kissed me. And we sat on the sofa together, and I leant on him, and he, his head on me, and he took my hands in his, and said my hands were so little, he could hardly believe they were hands, as he had hitherto only been accustomed to handle hands like Ernst.
So you can see that, I think that's such a wonderful thing. So little handle hands like Ernst. And the great thing about Albert, of course, from Victoria's point of view, he's really not interested in other women. So he hadn't, unlike her uncles, had a string of mistresses. So he was, they both came to the wedding only with eyes for each other. When Victoria said to Lord Melbourne, that she was so pleased that she was so pleased that Albert wasn't interested in other women, Melbourne famously said, "No, ma'am, that comes later." So after Victoria proposes to Albert, of course she had to propose to Albert because she was the queen and she had the upper hand there. Albert goes back to Coburg to say goodbye to his childhood home, and here is Victoria writing about their last meeting before he goes.
We kissed each other so often, and I leant on that dear soft cheek, fresh and pink like a rose. It was 10 o'clock and it was time for his going. I gave Albert a last kiss and saw him drive off. I cried much and felt wretched. Oh, how I love him, how intensely, how devotedly, how ardently. I cried and felt so sad. Wrote in my journal, walked, cried.
I think we've all written in our journal, walked, cried. Well, certainly, some of us have, I certainly have. You can see it is very much a teenage diary of a queen. Albert, unfortunately, was not a popular. I'm sorry again. Albert was not a popular choice with the British people because they thought that they felt that they had rather too many Germans on the throne, and they felt that he had no money and he was really a fortune hunter who'd come here to marry the richest woman in the world. And this is one of the nasty rhymes of the day that was written about Albert.
Becomes the bridegroom of Victoria's choice, the nominee of Letson's voice. He comes to take for better or for worse England's fat queen and England's fatter purse.
Today's tabloids have nothing on the 19th century. And Albert came from was very straight-laced, as those of you who've watched the series will know, and he was horrified by the rather looser morals of the English court. So when it came to their wedding, he wanted to make sure that the bridesmaids all had mothers of unblemished reputation. Lord Melbourne said to the Queen, I really don't think that's going to be possible now. I think there are 12 women in the aristocracy of unblemished reputation. So Victoria had to write to Albert and explain why that couldn't be so.
I always think we should be indulgent to other people, as I always think. If we had not been so well brought up and so well taken care of, we might have also gone astray.
Yes, that tolerance was something she lost as she got older. She became a lot less understanding of other people's failings. And the wedding itself was carefully stage managed to preserve Albert's pride. Victoria wore white and she didn't wear jewels, so that she wanted to appear like an ordinary woman. And of course, afterwards, she writes a very passionate entry the morning after her wedding.
We had dinner in our sitting room, but I had such a sick headache that I could eat nothing and was obliged to lie down in the middle of the blue room for the remainder of the evening, on the sofa. But ill or not, capital letters, I never never spent such an evening, still capital letters, my dearest dear Albert sat on a footstool by my side, and his excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I could never have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms, and we kissed each other again and again. Oh, this was the happiest day of my life.
Victoria was definitely not one of those Victorian women who lay back and thought of England. she enjoyed the carnal side of her marriage, and Victoria and she had 9 children, and after the 9th child, her doctor, Dr. Reed, said, "You know, ma'am, I think maybe you should stop now." And she went, "Oh, doctor, what, no more fun in bed?" Anyway, there's a wonderful little entry about, that she wrote a couple of days after their wedding.
My dearest Albert put on my stockings for me. I went in and saw him shave. A great delight for me.
So you can see it's a very intimate, the idea of reading that by a queen is quite extraordinary, isn't it? But the adjustment to married life wasn't easy for either of them. Before they got married, Albert, funnily enough, was hoping for a honeymoon, but the Queen had other ideas.
I must apologise to the ambassador for my German accent. It might perhaps be a good and delicate action not to depart from what I've been told is the usual custom in England for married people to stay up to 4 to 6 weeks apart from the town and society. Might we not retire from the public eye for at least a fortnight or a week?
She won't even give him a week. She only gives him 2 days. And here, this is the Queen's reply.
My dear Albert, you forget, my dearest love, that I am the sovereign, and that business can stop and wait for nothing. Parliament is sitting, and something occurs almost every day for which I am required, and it is quite impossible for me to be absent from London. Therefore, 2 or 3 days is already a long time to be absent. I must come out after the 2nd day. I cannot keep alone. This is also my wish in every way.
And that put Albert in his place, as he wrote briefly to a friend in Germany after his wedding.
In my home life, I am very happy and contented, but the difficulty in filling my place with the proper dignity is that I am only the husband and not the master in the house.
And Victoria obviously sensed this, and she writes in her diary,
God knows how great my wish to make this beloved being happy and contented.
Yes, she wished it, but she didn't give up any of the things that she enjoyed, like late nights and parties and dancing, all of which Albert was not so keen on. But time and biology was on Albert's side. Victoria got pregnant literally probably on their wedding night, and Albert was very pleased when he was made regent in the event of his wife dying in childbirth. And he was thrilled that he was now being given more to do.
I have come to be extremely pleased with Victoria in the past few months. She has only twice had the sulks. She puts more confidence in me daily.
Yes, but Victoria wasn't happy about being pregnant, and after the birth of her first child, she expresses herself very forcefully in a letter to her uncle Leopold.
You cannot really wish me to be the mother of such a huge family, for I think you will see with me the great inconvenience a large family would be to us all, and particularly the country, independent of the hardship and inconvenience to myself. Men never think, at least seldom, what a hard task it is for women to go through this very often.
And much later, when her oldest child, Vicky, is married and has her first baby, she writes,
I feel much more of our being like a cow or a dog at such moments. When our poor nature becomes so animal, you spend your whole day in the nursery as it is the ruin of many a refined and intellectual young lady.
But although she sounds a bit sort of she sounds like she doesn't like children, I'm not sure that that's entirely true. And I actually think the great thing about Victoria is that she can say and believe at least 2 or 3 different things at once. We're just going to show, I'm going to show you a couple of slides from her watercolours from the Royal Collection. And the first is a slide of the young Prince of Wales when he's a baby that Victoria painted. And you can see that you know, with a parrot, and you can see that she has observed him very closely. So I think that she actually adored her children. And then there's another painting that she did of some other children that belong to a Scottish crofter. And they show her talent for watercolours, but also her interest and her abiding curiosity in other people. So, but while Victoria didn't welcome her 9 pregnancies, of course Albert did. Every time Victoria got pregnant and had a child, Albert's power and influence increased.
I have my hands very full now, as I also look after Victoria's political affairs. I intend to be the natural head of the family, superintendent of our household, manager of her private affairs, her sole confidential advisor in politics, and only assistant in her communication with the officers of government, her private secretary and permanent minister.
Albert was also Victoria's personal stylist, and on many occasions he used to choose her dresses. And if you go into the wonderful exhibition next door, Victoria, Woman in Crown, you'll see the dress that he designed for her to wear at the Great Exhibition. It's in a special shocking pink. It's faded now, but he chose it to be in this very bright colour so that she would stand out against the crowd. He also designed for her some really fabulous jewels, and again you can see those next door. There's an amazing emerald tiara. So whatever you say about Albert, his heart was in the right place jewel-wise. And he, unfortunately, again, I'm sorry, Ambassador, I'm really sorry about this, but the English aristocracy did not take to Albert. They felt he was a bit foreign. He was too arty, he was too serious, he was too prudish. You know, he did things like compose music. He was interested, you know, he catalogued the incredible old masters that they had in Windsor. And he wasn't as interested in, you know, aristocratic pursuits like hunting, shooting, and fishing. However, when Victoria and Albert went to stay with some aristocrats, people were very impressed when Albert went out to ride with a Queen, and they discovered that he was, in fact, an excellent rider.
One can hardly credit the absurdity of people here, but Albert's riding so boldly and hard has made such a sensation that it has been written about all over the country, and they make much more of it than as if he had done some great act. It rather disgusts one, but still, it has to be done and does good, for it has put an end to all the impertinent sneering about Albert's riding.
One of the things people objected to about Albert was those high boots that Victoria was talking about in that first quote, because he liked to wear, as the Germans did, long high boots that came up to mid-thigh that were red, and the English find that very peculiar. But while Victoria bitterly resented the press being rude about Albert, their own relationship was a stormy one. At the beginning, there were 3 people in Victoria and Albert's marriage: Victoria, Albert, and Baroness Lacy, her governess, who had actually room next door to their bedroom with an interconnecting door, which must have been awkward. And Albert deeply objected to this woman interfering in his marriage, and he hated the way that, he really objected to the way that she looked after their children. And this is a very cross letter he writes to Victoria, because he thinks that Lazen is making their oldest daughter, Princess Vicky, ill.
Dr. Clark has mismanaged the child and poisoned her with calamine. You have starved her. Take the child away and do as you like, and if she dies, you will have it on your conscience.
Later, he wrote to his brother,
Victoria is too hasty and passionate for me to be able often to speak of my difficulties. She will not hear me out, but often flies into a rage and overwhelms me with reproaches and suspiciousness, want of trust, ambition, envy, etc., etc. There are therefore 2 ways open to me. One, to keep silence and go away, in which case I am like a naughty schoolboy who is dressed down from his mother and goes off snub. 2, I can be still more violent, and then we have scenes, which I hate, so I'm sorry for Victoria and her misery.
So, no wonder then that Victoria wrote later,
I think people really marry far too much. It is such a lottery after all, and for a poor woman a very doubtful happiness.
But apart from that, their life was a remarkably happy one. Here's an excerpt about a typical day in the life of Victoria and Albert, which Victoria wrote after Albert's death.
The wardrobe maid came in at 7. The prince would get up, put on his quilted dressing gown, and went into his sitting room where his green German lamp was lit. He bought the original one from Germany, and we always had 2 on our tables. He would write letters and read a little until he came in at 8 and told me in German to get up. In the evenings, I sit on a sofa in the middle of the room with a small table before it, on which stand a lamp and a candlestick. Albert sitting in a low armchair on the opposite side of the table with another small table in front of him, on which he usually stands his book. Before she went to bed, Albert would come into my dressing room, talking over the company and what had passed. Such a pleasure. Sometimes my maids would come in and begin to undress me. He would go on talking, make his observations on my jewels and ornaments, and give people good advice on how to keep them, or would occasionally reprimand if anything had not been carefully attended to. He would then go to his dressing room. I undressed quickly, with the last dawned and often read while my hair was doing afterwards.
And that's very sad, because you can see that she's writing this after he's dead, and she's thinking, if only I rushed into his dressing room and spent more time with him instead of reading and dawdling and having my hair done. And it's so poignant, because after all, when Albert died, he and Victoria were only 42, and although they'd had 21 interesting, happy, stormy years, Victoria was in the prime of life, and I think it was a great regret of her life that she didn't spend more time with him. While he was alive, obviously one of their biggest worries was how to be a good parent, and anybody who's watched series 3 will know that their 2 eldest children, Vicky and Bertie, could not have been more different. Vicky was very precocious, Bertie was what we've now called, I think was probably dyslexic, certainly had learning difficulties. Anyway, I'm very pleased to say that we have the 2 actors who play Prince Bertie and Princess Vicky here with us today, and they're going to read a little bit from Bertie and Vicky's letters and diaries. So, Laurie and Louisa, will you come up on stage, please? Laurie's going to read one of Bertie's earliest diary entries.
I do not know how it is that I am ever naughty, for I am quite happy when I am good.
He doesn't mean it though, because a month later he writes,
Other children are not always good. Why should I always be good? Nobody is always good.
So his older sister Vicky was very precocious, could read and write fluently and speak 3 languages by the age of 5. And this is Vicky when she's 6 years old, telling off her governess because she can't remember the name of a French poet.
Oh yes, I dare say. You did? You know all about it, but you have forgotten.
Réfléchissez.
Réfléchissez. Go back to that clever memory and you'll remember it. I'm only 6, but I never forget anything.
And poor Bertie was very confused because there he was with this very talented older sister, and his mother's the Queen, and he can't understand. He thinks, that obviously Vicky, because she's older and cleverer than him, will be the next monarch, not him.
You see, Vicky will be Mama's successor. Mama is now the Queen, and Vicky will have the crown next, and she will be Victoria II.
Now we're going to have a little clip from the series with Victoria talking to Bertie.
I don't want to be King, Mama.
I know, darling. Come here. Do you know what destiny means? It means that there is something in your life you must do. And my destiny and yours is to rule this country. Think of it as a little flame inside you. Nothing can put it out, Bertie.
Victoria certainly fulfilled her destiny. There's some debate about how much political influence she actually had, but I think there's one thing that we all take from Victoria, and that's her name. It was a name, of course, that nobody had at the time. She was the first Victoria. I mean, it was a name as peculiar then, or as strange then as perhaps, I don't know, Beyonce would have been, 15 years ago. It was a kind of made-up name. And yet it was the name that she chose, and I think that's because, it was about victory, it was about winning, and she intended right from the beginning of her reign that she was going to be victorious. And, she certainly changed the image of the monarchy from a bunch of dissolute aristocrats with illegitimate children all over the place and debts into the most respected family brand in the world. And, she chose the name that defined the era. All over the 19th century is known as the Victorian era, and that's all down to her. And so that stands slightly in contrast to the final quote that I've chosen from Victoria's Diaries and Letters. It's one that always makes me laugh because it shows Victoria's complete ability to contradict what she really, really thought. Jenna.
I am every day more convinced that we women, if we are to be good women, feminine and amiable and domestic, are not fitted to reign. At least it is against their nature that they drive themselves to the work that it entails.
So she's saying, so what Victoria's saying is that she probably wasn't a good woman because she certainly showed herself fit to reign. And that's the thing I always think so funny about Victoria. She doesn't believe in votes for women, and that's because she's all powerful. So that's the sort of contradictory nature of the woman that she's certainly my favourite queen. And thank you very much for listening. And now, if any of you would like to ask us some questions, I think there are some mics that are travelling around the room. Don't be shy. There's somebody with a question. Just here, in the second row, in the blue shirt. Do you have a question, or am I just pointing at you and I get quick? You haven't got a question. Oh dear. Has anyone got a question? Oh no, there's a lady at the back.
I was just wondering, did she talk in her diaries in response to some of the assassination attempts on her?
Oh yes. As you know, there were 7 assassination attempts, and she does talk about them. There's one where she says she absolutely insists after she's been attacked in Hyde Park that she and Albert go out again that evening to show that she's not frightened. And I thought that was rather wonderful. Yes, I mean it's incredible that it became almost a sort of rite of passage for a certain kind of psychotic young man to try and go and have an attempt on Victoria's life. But the really interesting thing is that all these young men who tried to shoot her, none of them actually loaded their guns. So it was I think they just wanted to become famous. It was a way of becoming famous. You try and kill the Queen, and then you become briefly the most famous person in the country. Oh, there's a question over here. No,
hello.
Sorry, you'll be next.
So I'm actually in the middle of writing my dissertation about Queen Victoria. So I'll be looking at how gender affected her as a wife, as a mother, and a monarch, and how those relationships changed throughout time. Do you think that the changing gender roles in society had a big impact on Queen Victoria, or do you think she was really keen on keeping on traditional ways?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think the point about Victoria is that she's the head of state. She comes to the throne at a time when, you know, women were their husband's property. I mean, literally, they were their goods and chattels. And so she is, you know, head of state at a time when Britain is a completely patriarchal society. And although she professes to want to be a great wife and mother and so forth, and women aren't fit to reign, I don't think she believes that for a moment. I think she believed very clearly in her destiny as the nation's ruler. I don't think she ever felt that because she was a woman she shouldn't be the queen. So that's what I mean about this kind of contradiction that sort of so embodies Victoria. But I think that she, I think the very fact that she was there meant that people changed their perception of women. The fact that she was, I suppose, you know, a working mother on the throne. You know, she has all these children and she's also the head of state. That was unheard of. No woman before Victoria, no queen before, English queen before Victoria had children while being on the throne. And, you know, if you think about it, before that, people had thought, you know, they'd hidden women away while they were pregnant, they weren't allowed to do anything, and now here's the woman who's the most powerful woman in the country, she's having children. So you can't sort of escape the biology, and you also can't escape the fact that she can be competent, that she can do her job as well as have all these children. I mean, now we take it for granted, but then it seemed a very extraordinary thing. So I think whatever she says about women's rights, the fact that she's there probably had the biggest impact on the changing perception of women more than anything else. And so, you know, at the beginning of her reign, women are, you know, are their husband's property. By the end of the reign, that's changed, and, you know, 20 years later, they get the right to vote. So I think, you know, and Victoria is definitely part of that change. There's a lady here who had a question.
Hello. Did Victoria continue with her love for horses and riding up until her death, as does our current queen?
I don't think she's quite as keen a horsewoman as Elizabeth, but I think she carried on riding. She and John Brown used to go for long rides together, or she'd sit on her pony while John Brown would lead it in front. But I don't think she was quite the sort of equestrienne but I think what she really liked was to go out and sort of gallop through the park, and that's why we have a lot of riding scenes in Victoria. And in fact, Jenna had to learn to ride for the park. She's giving me a look. Yeah. Yeah, but the riding is always, we're like, oh God, we've got to write another riding scene. Oh dear, we forget. It's quite scary.
This is a question for Jenna. Queen Victoria was very young when she came to the throne and struggled to have her voice heard. And you were very young when you started acting. Do you think you experienced the same sort of thing starting out?
Oh, I definitely don't think I can't really say my personal life was in line with becoming the Queen of England aged 18. Becoming the most powerful woman in the world overnight. But it's a really interesting thing to explore, and for me in particular, it was really interesting in the first series because I was playing younger and playing, obviously we began the series on the day that she became queen, and just physicality-wise, and putting on the costumes and the lace bonnets and things that made you feel so young and small, and then trying to work out how I would play a scene or sit on the throne and talk to and project authority, or how to be, and realizing actually, me as an actor struggling with working out how to do that, but interestingly that must have been very much how she felt as well as a young girl who everybody, you know, told her she was too young and inexperienced and needed to be advised and needed to be, you know, and I think being very young and being a queen, it was a really interesting thing to explore.
There's a couple of hands up there.
Could you say anything about the diaries bringing her out of seclusion from public life? Was there anything in there? And how did the state cope with her withdrawal after Albert's death?
Well, not very well. There was a sort of good 10 years when she pretty much stayed in seclusion. Albert died in 1861, and it's not until about 1869, I think, where the Prince of Wales nearly dies of typhoid, like Albert, but he does get better, and then they do a sort of a procession through London, and she can't believe how many people have come out to hear her. And I think after that she starts thinking, oh well, you know, I quite like this. I'm ready to be queen again. But there was this 10 years where she hid from the public, and I think that's because she was, you know, grief-stricken to begin with. Then I think there's a period where she becomes very involved with John Brown. And I think there's also a suggestion, and certainly that Andrew Wilson makes in his brilliant biography, that she's drinking quite heavily at this period. And he bases that on on looking at her handwriting, which, you know, earlier in her reign it's very neat, and then in the 1860s it suddenly goes like this. And he suspects that she and John Brown were sort of drowning their sorrows, and I believe they had a special cocktail which was a mixture of claret and Scotch whisky. So yeah, so you can imagine that she might not be entirely fit for public duties at that point. But then, thank goodness, and there were lots of public comment made about that at the time. You know, there were all these cartoons that said Mrs. Brown, and there was this famous cartoon of Buckingham Palace with a sign on it saying "To Let," you know, the owner has gone away. And I think the public were getting very fed up, and I think Britain became as close to being a republic as it's ever been in those 10 years. But then, of course, you know, you have this terrible illness of the Prince of Wales, and he gets better, and the Queen's there, and suddenly all that's forgotten. But it was a very rocky period for the monarchy at that point. And I think it's probably the only time where Victoria really sort of turned her back on public opinion completely. And there's a lady there.
Hello.
For Jenna, I was wondering, did you attempt to tackle the diaries before taking her up? Not taking her up. Or was it just 60 million words too many and you found a better source of information?
I mean, a mixture of both. I think we had about 3 to 4 weeks before beginning the job, which was kind of learn how to ride side saddle. They were kind of like a Victoria boot camp-esque thing. But we were talking before, how many biographies were we saying? Is that over 200 in the English language? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there's like 2 biographies. There have been 2 biographies of Victoria in the English language published every year since her death.
So you could actually spend years and years and years preparing for each series, effectively. So it was a case of kind of trying to get numerous sources, numerous biographies. You have her diaries, and I've been taking them up to where we are in the series every year, but always knowing that they've been edited, always knowing that, you know, it's very interesting going from biography to biography, knowing that her diaries in particular are edited. But what I found very useful for the first series in particular was her watercolours, because I felt that gave such an access into her visually in terms of what she sees, what she's interested in, and it's the only thing that isn't edited.